A well-behaved woman is trim and proper. Chores always done, not a hair out of place. When the husband comes home, she greets him with a smile.
I'm sorry, what the fuck?
Are you tired of Hitler?
I feel no shame.
Okay, one liar as a kid can find another liar.
I want that stricken from the record.
How else is she gonna learn if she doesn't have a feather?
I could go fuck in the big house.
You're a mess, girl. I am here to audition for Babysitters Club extras.
I brought my own hammer.
Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of Well-Behaved Women. I am one of your hosts, Hannah, and I'm here with our main host, Lauren, who each week tells me and our other host, Big B, a new story each week of a legendary, iconic, or just history-making woman. Somebody who did something, good or bad. We don't know who it is.
Yeah. I mean, they have all sorts of different... People are layered. They can do good things and bad things. So we actually have a special guest with us today. His name is Adam Franti, and his podcast is called Murderhobos. I will let him give you a little bit of an elevator pitch on what that show addresses.
First off, kudos to the name.
Thank you. That was so the show is mostly me. I do narrative biography episodes about sort of toxic men. I guess the idea is I use biographies of individual people to explore the cultures of masculinity that have been present in various parts of history. So I did an episode about Wild Bill Hickok, which will be appropriate to the topic for this episode today. But the name we actually came up with because we sort of wanted to steal some territory from, gamer nerds and other history nerds to try to get them like, oh, is that a D&D podcast? No, actually, it's a deeply academic podcast where you're going to learn all about toxicity. So that's the trick. That's what we're trying to do. So
I love it.
Yeah. We've finished our first season. We do biography episodes followed by Q&As, and we have 20 episodes out now and some bonus material. So if you want to find us, we're on pretty much any podcast app. It's Murderhobos, all one word.
I'm literally looking it up now. I am going to be hearing this for like the next few days at least.
Part of my research for this episode was listening to one of Adam's episodes, and holy fuck was it good. I listened to it literally on the way to recording last week and then on the way back. I
appreciate it. Thank you.
It was really good. Yeah. I don't have that long of a drive. So like that, what happens maybe once a week. So that's like the only time that I can catch up on all of my podcasts.
Yeah, it's a pretty long drive. I do the same for work every day, especially when I was working like an hour away. Podcasts are like the way that I got through it. So this will definitely help me with my commute a few days a week at least.
Yes, commuter's best friend.
Oh my God, yes.
Just hope you all enjoy it. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything.
Oh, for sure.
So Adam is joining us today because the woman we're going to discuss is, at her very core, a storyteller. Most of what we know about her life is either from stories on stories, or stories on stories on stories, or from her own biography that she dictated.
I love
as a storyteller.
This. I mean, unreliable narrator, but she knows how to spin a yarn.
Exactly.
Awesome.
In the world of the Wild West in the late 19th century, history was created by the people who decided to create it. When we tell tall tales, there are always elements of truth, but how much truth makes it through almost doesn't matter to a certain point. Many different sources have many different stories, so we're going to tell a lot of them. All right, one more note. We're going to be talking, obviously, about the Wild West. There will be talk of battles of indigenous tribes in the affected areas. We'll be discussing them as Indians, as that was kind of what they were referred to in terminology at the time. In the spirit of the times, think of this as though we're sitting over a campfire talking into the night. In the background, someone plays a low harmonica under the stars. All right, so without further fanfare, on this year in history.
Okay.
The first British public toilet for women opens in Bedford Street, London.
So that implies there were public toilet for men, but women had to just scurry and find one as quick as possible?
Duh.
Hold it in.
Hold it in. Get home.
Like you can hold your periods. Just keep it inside. You just
Just hold
squeeze.
it.
It'll be fine.
You just clench real hard.
Mhm,
Yeah,
that's what
Kegel
Kegels are for.
exercises. Yeah. I love it. We both went there immediately.
Let's see. New Zealand declares self-governance.
Okay. I'm gonna try to guess when this self-governance. They were under the British, so I'm gonna guess 1908. Just a preliminary guess.
As always, I want more information.
You want? Okay, I've got one more information for you, and then I need your guess.
Okay.
That's fine.
The book Uncle Tom's Cabin was published, written by abolitionist Harriet Beecher Stowe.
I'm gonna say
Well,
it's
it's
like
definitely not in
1890.
So I'm cheating because I can see
Yeah.
the script, but
Okay.
you're a little high. Harriet Beecher
Okay, so
Stowe
we're-
is before
I love the spirit of it, but yeah,
the 1890s.
We both don't get to the showcase. Neither of us gets there.
That's okay.
All right.
we are
Well, Uncle Tom's Cabin. Let me think. It's got to be. I mean, if it's 1860s.
closer.
Close.
We're at 1852,
Ooh, okay. I was way off.
So mid 19th century.
mid 19th century, smack dab. Martha Cannary was born in. Is it Canary or Cannery?
I've heard both. It's spelled canary.
Yeah.
In the show Deadwood, they say cannery, and in a lot of other movies they say canary. So I don't know that there's any like official version of it.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go with Canary because that's the version I know, and let's just lean into whatever.
Yeah.
If that's how she's known, that's how she's known.
Also, take into consideration the British factor. That's always puts you through a loop.
Cannery.
Right.
There you go. Martha Cannary was born in Mercer County, Missouri. Her father, Robert, liked to gamble, and the mother, Charlotte, liked to drink. And in one account, may have been a sex worker that Robert tried to reform unsuccessfully.
Oh yeah, he can change her. In his gambling ways.
I'll fix it. If I get the big lottery, she'll just stay with me.
Yeah. Yeah, she'll stay once I get that one golden ticket.
Mm-hmm. Martha was the oldest of 6 kids. In her own words, as a child, I always had a fondness for adventure and outdoor exercise, and a special fondness for horses, which I began to ride at an early age and continued to do so until I became an expert rider, being able to ride the most vicious and stubborn of horses. In fact, the greater portion of my life in those early times was spent in this manner.
She's a horse girl.
She's a horse girl.
We love.
And that's actually like strikingly close to the way that Hickok described his own youth, although he was from Illinois and not Missouri. And like coming from Illinois, her father was probably super pro-slavery because most of the Missourians who settled in the 1850s were doing it there specifically to expand the slavery franchise, they called it.
What part of Illinois?
It was the very northern border of Missouri and the southern border of Illinois.
Oh,
Like right
so-
smack dab in the middle of the state, but like right on that border.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
My great grandma and the whole family are from that area. She was always a St. Louis Cardinals fan, so it's pretty much Missouri down there.
Traders. It is.
Traders.
Traders.
It's
Hickok
interesting though,
was
being from Illinois though, because Mercer County, Missouri is clear on the other side of Missouri, north of Kansas City.
Yeah. It's the northern half of Missouri. Like it's
You're a long way from home, boy.
Yeah. Well, and at that time, it was kind of the gold rush had started. So we've got a bunch of people that are trying to move north and move west because that's where
That's where the
gold.
money is.
That's
Yeah.
where
There's
the
not
gold
a ton
is.
of gold in Missouri, but there's a lot of silver.
It was Missouri was settled like by plantation owners. Basically, they were trying to grow cotton, trying to basically make it into like New Virginia, New Georgia, something like that. The land wasn't quite as good as Virginia was, but it was predominantly settled by slave owning plantation owners or aspiring slave owning plantation owners. So once Bleeding Kansas got started, which we'll probably talk about in a bit, a bunch of Missourians were trying to sort of violently expand the franchise into Kansas, and that was where the whole conflict came from, which was a violent conflict over whether it was going to be a free state or a slave state.
Okay. So yeah, there's a lot up in the air. There's a lot of tension and uncertainty.
Yeah. The more I learned about the 1850s in the United States, the more similar it seems to be to like today. obviously, like,
There's still a lot of
you
racial
know,
tension in Missouri, especially.
it's
Yeah.
and yeah, it's just like the faith in government was at an all-time low. People were like trying to solve their own problems. People didn't trust the soldiers or the like, it was all very similar to today. And I wouldn't have said that, I think, before I did a lot of research about Bleeding Kansas for the Wild Bill episode.
Wow. Yeah. It's very scary to see a lot of these similarities to what's going on now. You never know if your neighbor's friend or foe in that way.
History repeats itself over and over.
That it does.
Yeah,
as is tradition.
As is tradition. So in 1865, the rumors of the riches and freedoms that the West provided was too good to pass up. So when she was 13, the family decided to head west.
Get out there.
Get out there. They packed up their shit and headed out to Virginia City, Montana on a wagon train along portions of the Oregon Trail. And
I'm sorry, Virginia City, Montana.
Yeah. There's also Virginia City, Montana.
I don't know why I didn't know that, but now I know.
North than west. I don't know. I think these people have bad sense of direction.
I mean, the whole idea was like kind of a
let's replicate Virginia everywhere.
It did a north and then a west, and it was basically like where you could get through fields.
Yeah, it was super cheap land was the big thing.
So Montana.
1865 would have been like really early in the settlement of Montana. Things really picked up after 1868. There was a famous cattle drive. There's a guy named Charles Goodnight who's like a really famous cowboy, and he drove the first herd of cattle into Montana and started the first ranch in Montana. And that's actually loosely what the book and the miniseries Lonesome Dove is about. They sort of play a little bit with the timeline, but that's essentially the cattle drive that they fictionalize in Lonesome Dove. Yeah.
I guess I never understood cattle drives. If you could speak more on that. I know it's kind of like taking obviously a large group of cattle, but I mean, where were they coming from? How far would they go during these cattle drives?
So mostly it was ranchers in Texas. So ranchers in Texas grew the herds, like raised the steer, raised the beef and everything. And then to get them to the railroad, which went back to like Chicago and New York and Boston, like meat packing cities, they would drive them north up into railheads in Kansas.
Okay.
So like Hickok as a lawman got started in a cow town, they called it, which was Monticello, I think in Iowa, actually. So anyway, so you take the herd, you take thousands of cattle, and you have to literally walk them up to Kansas.
Okay.
So they had all these northern trails. They're all cow trails that you'd take from Texas all the way up, and you have to pass through. They called it Indian country, and you have to pass through like pretty dangerous places. And so cowboys they'd get a night off, and they'd go into town, and they were all armed. They were all extremely bored. They all had cash in their pockets, so they'd get drunk and they'd shoot each other, and that's why you needed a tough guy lawman like Wild Bill Hickok. But so most of the time you're going from Texas, and it could be really far south, like along the coast. Like Goodnight's cattle drive started near Galveston, and then he went up. It's like 1,300 miles all the way up to Montana when they went. So that's the idea. But he drove them up there to start a ranch rather than to sell them at a railhead. But normally you'd go up to somewhere like Kansas, stop at a rail yard, sell the cows, and then go home.
Okay. Oh, all right. Thank you.
These trips would take what, weeks, months?
Weeks, yeah, probably most of the summer.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you got to figure you're basically walking them there.
Yeah. There's only so long they can go in a day, I guess. And you have to, I mean, it's not exactly a straight line. You're going to run into towns and
one cow's going to get away.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wasn't that, I mean, they had a bunch of people on horseback. That's like a whole company of people that's like job it is to keep them all in the group.
Yeah. Those are literally cowboys. That's where the term and the whole word comes from, is that's their job. So they'd have to ride, they called it night herd. So you'd get the herd all together and they'd all go to sleep, and then you'd have to keep riding around them all night just to make sure they don't like run off, because then you'd have to chase them down the next morning. You don't want to waste your time doing that. But then you have to cross rivers, and the rivers can flood, and there can be thunderstorms, and like the herd can be struck by lightning, and like it was a dangerous, like tough, super hard job. And that's why when they get a chance to relax for an hour or two in a town like Abilene or something like that, they were
They're
known
gonna
as
get
very dangerous
rip-roaring drunk.
places.
Oh yeah, I want to go to the
exactly.
bar.
Yeah.
If I'm like going, especially if you have night herd, I'm
Mhm.
going
What
to
is
the
it,
bar after a shift.
A bar,
Yeah.
a brawl, and a brothel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A weekend.
That's a good weekend. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Adam, you study, the West and everything. How do you feel about like the legends of like lightning striking piles of dead cows and buffaloes and like igniting methane and like causing explosions?
I haven't actually come across a description of like a methane explosion that I've seen, but there's a guy wrote a semi-fictional account of his time as a cowboy in 1882 on a cattle drive. I can't remember where the destination was, but he actually describes like a part of the herd being struck by lightning and like several cows had been killed. So it was a real danger, and especially with like the dust clouds that they could kick up, like static electricity was a thing,
Right.
and you could see like balls of lightning could go between their horns and spread throughout like the whole herd.
It
So
acted as like an antenna.
yeah, well, kind of. It's like what do they call it? It's the naval term is St. Elmo's fire.
Oh,
That's the
I've
term,
heard
right?
that
So
before.
it's
Thought
ball
that was a
lightning they
movie.
call it, and it's usually when like static electricity crickles and
Okay.
it makes visible sparks that kind of travel between points.
So it's
And
like
so that
those
could
glass
happen on a cow
domes that
herd.
you like put your hand
Yeah.
on. Yeah.
Oh, I
Yeah,
love
like
those.
you go to those stores in the mall when you were younger, right? And they'd always have
I had
little...
one. I was obsessed with it. My parents would be
Yeah.
like, she's up playing with it, and they have to come take it for me so I go to bed.
Her hair's like
stuff.
standing up on it.
Yeah.
Oh, I tried.
I always thought those were cool. Like that was my favorite part of little science museums because you put your
Oh,
whole
for
palm
sure.
on it. It's just
Get hot if you left it there.
yeah. If you left it on too long, all of a sudden you're like, oh, why is my hand so hot? Oh no, it's heat. I got you. Okay. All right, back to it. We're going northwest, right? We're going up the Oregon Trail
Montana.
into Montana.
We're getting
Montana.
dysentery.
Yeah, exactly. We're gonna
Getting
try
bit
to
by a
ford the
snake.
river. It's gonna be a whole thing.
Getting bit by a snake
Yeah.
for sure.
So on this trail, Martha really enjoys the antics of the old geezers on the trail. She sits in for story time, she rides horses with them, and she learns how to shoot out on the trail. So she would actually hunt while she was on the trail, and by the time they reached their destination, she was a remarkably good shot by any measure, and she could ride with the best of them.
Nice.
A lot of
She's
these cows,
showing off.
yeah, basically. And I'm pretty sure it was like people who had been on this trail had gone on these things before. They kind of served as escorts too. Like, hey, I know the way, so I'll make sure that you get there safely.
You generally hire a guide.
Yeah,
that
who had
was
already
a
made
really
the trip.
important. Yep. That was a super important part of the whole thing because they know where to go, they know where to avoid, they know the river crossings and all that, and it was like indispensable.
And they capitalized on it
Yeah,
big time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You don't want to end up like the Donner Party.
No, it's a thriving business.
And there were, like any thriving business, there were also like really dishonest people who did that, who would like lead a wagon out for a day, take their pay, and then just fuck off and leave them, right? And like that was a thing that could happen.
Did you, Adam, grow that mustache because of your love for the wilderness and the West?
I actually, so I used to work at a historic site, and I like wore a uniform in the 1880s and everything. So
Wow.
I grew my mustache for the first time doing that, and I've actually just brought it back recently because I play vintage baseball, and we had
awesome.
With the
we had
knickers and everything.
Yep.
Oh,
So we
that's
had
amazing.
we hosted a tournament last year, and I told my team that if we won a game at the tournament, I'd come back. I had a beard then. I'd come back with just the mustache, and we did. And so I had to, and I've kept it basically for a year now. So
It's
great.
It is.
Yeah.
It's great.
Excellent.
I think I mentioned it the last time we spoke as well. It's impressive. I have a quote. Hannah, I sent that to you directly in the Zoom link. And
Yes.
this is basically just kind of telling a little bit more about their journey through Martha Cannary's own words.
All right. I'm going to do my best in an accent, but just know.
Have fun with it. Yeah.
Okay. It's not my
You got
main
this.
skill. Okay. Many times in crossing the mountains, the trails were so bad that we had to lower wagons over the ledges by hand with ropes, for they were so rough and rugged that horses were no use. We also had exciting times fording the streams, for many of the streams on our way were noted for quicksands and boggy places where, unless we were careful, we would have lost horses and all. Then we had many dangers to encounter in the way of streams swelling on account of heavy rains. On occasions of this kind, the men would usually select the best places to cross streams. Myself, on more than one occasion, had mounted my pony and swam across the stream several times, merely to amuse myself. I had many narrow escapes from both my pony and myself being washed to certain death, but as the pioneers had plenty of courage, we overcame all obstacles and reached Virginia City in safety. I don't know what accent I pulled out, but I did my
It started
Fantastic.
Chicago.
I liked
for
it. It was
sure.
good.
It did start Chicago, yeah. Your roots were showing there.
Gotta represent, you know.
I love that she's like, just for funsies, like this thing that could definitely and has definitely killed a lot of people. Like I just did it for fun with my pony, and like we got into a couple close scrapes, but we were fine.
Yeah, you know, bogs,
Merely to amuse
quicksand,
myself.
all exciting. They're all exciting instead of horrifying, which is how I probably would have seen that. But yeah, she's just swimming across, showing off her might.
That was a playground in the 1800s. That was her playground. That was her
Fuck
park.
your swings. Fuck your swings and your monkey bars.
Ford a river with a pony.
Yeah, I got a pony, a dangerous river, and an afternoon to kill.
Yeah.
I think that's what they call old school.
Yeah.
Is
Old
that
school fun.
Is that old school?
Mm-hmm.
So on the way, if you guys, I've never played the Oregon Trail, but many people I
Never?
know.
Oh, never.
I was one of those kids that kind of moved away right when that got popular, and then moved back like right after they stopped using those systems. I really wasn't a video game kid.
There's even a card game version now, and it is
There
very
is.
fun.
It's
I have
actually
heard.
super fun. Yeah.
It's very
They've
fun.
even-
The odds
they've
are
redone it,
just as much
actually.
stocked against
just
you.
as horrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they even have like a new version that you can do. I think on like Apple or something. They've got it on
Yeah,
their
Apple
games.
has
But yeah,
its own. If you pay for like the Apple Arcade, whatever,
Yeah.
every month, they also have. Yeah, but
Okay.
it's not as good.
All right.
I'm also not going to pay for that.
That's fine.
Right.
We had it through our curriculum. Thank you.
Yeah,
If we ever
on
have
all
a game-
Macintosh computers.
Oh, with the really fat ones with the clear, like purple or green back.
Oh yeah.
I was
Orange,
telling
yes,
Gary
they
about
had all
those the other
kinds of
day. I was
colors.
like, in Bolivia, that was our computer lab, was like just or like orange, green, purple, orange, green, purple throughout the whole
Yep.
thing.
Teal.
that's
There's a
awesome.
bunch of different colors.
Oh yeah. I liked that teal color. I always tried to get that computer. Like I would be like, oh, a typing class. I gotta get to my little teal one.
Get to the teal.
Get to the teal. All right. Anyway, if you've played Oregon Trail, you know that pretty much everyone dies. So
In
mom-
some shape or form, yeah.
yeah,
That's the
So,
takeaway.
her mom Charlotte got pneumonia along the way, and found her grave along the journey in Blackfoot. So it was before they got to Virginia City that they had to bury her.
Oh.
And
That's
then
hard.
Grandpappy got the cholera.
I don't know.
Grandpappy was
I don't know
up
if
to something.
Grandpappy was alive at this point.
The ox drowned in the river. The boat sank.
She was talking about taking these wagons across these bloated rivers. Yeah.
Mhm.
Somehow she didn't get the dysentery.
She was
beat
strong.
the odds. She beat the odds.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
all that exercise and swimming and
Well, you got to stay
Mhm.
upstream.
true. Don't want dysentery again.
They did the right thing heading north.
There you go. So I have a little note in here in bright pink that says Adam can speak on wagon trails and the dreams of the West. I think we've already gone into that a little bit, but if you'd like to expand more, I would love to hear that.
Sure. So especially in the 1860s, like a lot of the established trails weren't like they'd been around a while, but they were still pretty wild. And by the 1870s or so, things get like not easy. This is never an easy journey, but they get a lot more like routine. So like 1865 is still you're going to a pretty unsettled part of the country, unsettled at least as white settlers would consider it. But like Montana is still has very few settlers. The trails are not super well established, so they're still very dangerous, and they're still kind of like unexplored. So this would have been a pretty dangerous trip, but also like not every wagon trip was like, as much as we joke about Oregon Trail, was like super crazy dangerous. There's actually a really interesting series. It's like a 15-book volume. It's called Covered Wagon Women, and it's every single volume. It starts in like 1810 or something like that, and it goes through just letters and diaries that were written by people, especially women, who went on Western trails. And so there's, if you would just like are interested in a time period, you pick the volume that has like 1855 to 1865 or whatever.
That's
and there's
awesome.
just tons of interesting detail about how, you know, the combination of extreme boredom and extreme danger that you might get being a traveler on a trail like this, and getting it specifically from the perspective of women who are writing about it, is also really fascinating. But yeah, so going to Montana was pretty ballsy. Like in 1865, it was pretty unsettled, it was pretty wild, but the cheap land is what everybody's after. Sort of the way the American economy kind of worked was like, if you weren't a capitalist, if you weren't somebody who owned a railroad or owned a factory or something like that, like the way that you could socially promote yourself was by owning land. And so that's part of what lured so many people out, even though they were extremely dangerous, and like even getting there could kill you. Once you got there, there were hostile Native Americans, there were, you know, treaty breaking white settlers, there were bandits and brigands who would rob you, there were people who would lead you halfway down a trail and then fuck off. And it was, you know, but people did it because this was the way that this was like kind of their version of like go to college and get a good job. It was go out to west and get some land, and that's going to kind of create the nest egg for your family. And that's why people were so willing to risk it. You
So
know,
that was the generational lie that was fed to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it was like, you know, if you look at the statistics, like not everybody who's going out there makes it, and not everybody who makes it out there stays there. And especially when they call them breakouts, which we'll talk about in a moment, but like when there were rumors, or when the reality of hostile Native Americans kind of on the trail, on the warpath, people abandoned their homes and just went back because it wasn't worth it. And the people who decided to stay were the ones who were willing to risk that kind of thing. And like when you look at kind of the settlement patterns and the local histories of this kind of thing, it's full of this kind of thing where, you know, you get 10,000 settlers in the first summer, and the next summer there's only 4,000 left because so many of them just picked up and went home because they're like, this isn't worth it. I'd rather work at the shirt factory, right?
Wow. And how much would that? Yeah, like that would have to be a really big decision to be like, I made this whole journey for potentially months and months. I mean, to have to
just to be like, all right, pack it up, we're going back, fuck this.
Yeah. I mean, that must have been a really big disappointment for them to turn around.
Yeah. And it says a lot about the perceived risks that somebody would say, like, I'm gonna get killed or die if I stay here, so it's not worth it, I'm going home. And you know, making a journey that's just as dangerous as the one that took you back out there.
Wow. I imagine the answer to this question is yes, since you're a historian. But have you ever been to the Wagon Museum at the Frontier Days Museum in Cheyenne, Wyoming?
I haven't. I've never actually been to Wyoming.
Whoa.
I was in Salt Lake City this last winter. Salt Lake City was interesting.
The Western museums that are in Cheyenne are stunning.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to go. I'd like to go to Deadwood too. Deadwood is like my favorite TV show, so I'd love to go to Deadwood, and yeah, that'd be fun.
This is the perfect episode for you.
Yeah.
So that's actually exactly what happened with their family. Her dad, Robert, showed up. He didn't really have a backup plan for like losing his wife and then all of a sudden becoming a widower and a single father of 6. And like Adam said, it's tough in Montana. It's cold and it's wild. And I think the gold rush had just barely started, and nothing was established. It was really hard. And so he was like, fuck it, we're going back south. So they turned around and they moved to Salt Lake City. And he got 40 acres of farmland there to make a living for his family.
Okay, 40 acres
of farmland in the desert.
Farmland
near-
and desert.
right near
Well,
the
so
Great
Salt
Kind of
Lake
went
is,
right over me.
Salt Lake is
Nice.
actually really,
Yeah.
really well known. Salt Lake is really well known for its like development of basically like water control. And so they made this really inhospitable place really lush and green. And of course, now it's a concrete jungle. But at the time, that was kind of a big deal. That was one of the big things that like the pioneers that settled the Mormons that settled the valley, like that was kind of the whole idea was like, you'll get out here and we're able to actually make it work. We're able to make it green. It's lush. It's beautiful. And this is like, what, maybe 15, 20 years after they had showed up there themselves. So they'd had time to establish this, and there was still a lot of land. And basically the pattern had been able, like they'd figured out the pattern for how to make that land work for them. And there was still a lot of land left to get.
Okay. So they had a lot to work with.
Right.
Now that
But
they
then
figured that out.
in 1867, Robert died too. So
Oh, shoot. Oh. Well,
All right,
It's
lady,
just-
you're in charge now.
Yeah.
figure it out.
So
Very
Martha
nice.
is now 14 years old. She is the caretaker of herself and her 5 siblings.
Oh, God.
The hell are you supposed to do with that many kids?
And she's
I don't
how
know,
old
but
now?
she's a lot better off than she would have been in
14.
Montana. Jesus.
14.
Yeah.
I mean, basically a lady at that point.
Yeah,
In
no,
her
she's
Yeah,
an
she's
adult
married.
by,
But, like-
by current standards of the time.
Yeah, why
But
doesn't
like
she
your
have a
brain
kid?
development, you don't know how to take care of 5 kids
Oh,
and
no.
all this land.
No.
She's unfamiliar with this. Like she literally, I mean, they had been there a year.
Yeah. It's not even
Her
her
whole life
home
for the
base.
past few years had been uprooted and in a wagon or on a train or whatever. And
Hmm.
just, all right, what do I do now?
Mhm.
I
So
don't know.
Also,
she does what she knows how to do. And so she packs all of them up again. And then they head out on a wagon again.
Yeah, she knows wagons.
Right. So she goes on a wagon train and then on an actual train, and she moves the Canary family over to Piedmont, Wyoming.
Okay. So they're in Wyoming now.
They're in Wyoming now.
if I were one of those kids, I'd be like, "What do you know about being in charge?
Yeah.
Why don't we-
I don't
why don't we just
respect
stay
you."
here. I'm tired of moving."
Yeah, I've had that. So in Piedmont, Martha was the sole caretaker for her siblings. She worked as a dishwasher and a cook and a waitress and a dance hall girl, as an ox team driver, as a nurse, as a scout, as a sex worker. She did what she needed to do to provide for her family.
Yeah,
So,
quite a
like-
resume.
And then we
Oregon
never
Trail
hear about her
Barbie.
family again.
Oh,
We just,
okay.
We just don't hear about them
Yeah.
ever.
She stopped
again.
writing about them.
Yeah, it's like she took care of her
Stopped
family.
raising them. Said, "You know what? I'm done.
Yeah.
You guys
They all
got it
turned-
from here."
Once they got to 14, you know.
I was just gonna
they...
say.
Yeah, you're on your own now.
You're on your own. You're 12 now.
I was raising 5 kids at your age.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Get a job.
What have you done with your life? Ugh.
Man.
So in 1870, Martha, okay, I would like to just start with, again, I'm just going to reiterate one of the things that I said at the beginning here, is she is a storyteller, and we don't know like what actually happened and what didn't, because there's records to show both things, or there's no records
Are you
to
preparing
show
us for an
anything.
embellishment of sorts?
All right, so
Yeah.
yes, I am a little bit. We might
Mhm.
be talking about embellishment. We might not. We have no idea. So in 1870, Martha found employment under General George Armstrong Custer at Fort Russell. She worked as a scout for the Army and donned a military uniform, which she wore with pride.
With Custer?
Custer.
Oh,
That's
sorry.
what she claims anyway.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's what I was
Yeah,
trying to think.
right.
Was she name
Yeah.
dropping?
General Custer, yeah.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Okay,
So
just
she-
double checking. Thank
She
you.
puts on this military uniform. She works for him as a scout. And so for the rest of her life, she would wear men's clothes just as casually as she wore women's clothes. Like she was comfortable in pants or something.
Oh God, forbid the
Not the
pants.
pants.
Yeah. Nope. Okay, so she's claiming that she's a scout for General Custer, and now she just all of a sudden was like, "I love pants."
Yeah, basically.
All
She's
right.
like, all right, I'm a scout now. I wear pants and I got this uniform and this is what I'm going to do. And B has a nice quote for us.
You want me to? Let's see.
I need like old prospector cowboy.
Way better than
Give me
mix
a
of Chicago
a
versus
Walter,
I don't know.
Yeah, give me a Walter Brennan.
There you go. Yeah.
Impression.
Yeah.
Mary knew how to shoot. She liked to dress as a man, or perhaps more accurately, she refused to dress like women of the era. And like men, she chewed tobacco and drank a lot of alcohol. They set her apart from her cohorts. She is reportedly one of the first white women to enter the Black Hills of South Dakota. The first place that attracted her attention, according to one train captain who saw her there when she was 20 years old, was a saloon where she was soon made blind as a bat from looking through the bottom of a glass.
For a second I thought somebody blinded her, but nope, she's just drunk.
No, she's fucking drunk.
She's just drunk. She's just, she wants to be that androgynous queen, forget society's rules.
Now. She's a booze hound.
I find it interesting that he's like, well,
like her mother before her.
Yeah. She dresses like a man, but more accurately, she refuses to dress like a woman. So she's
That's right. And she drinks like a man too.
Exactly. I find that so fascinating. They're
She spits like a man, she rides like a man, she dresses like a man, she shoots like a man.
She walks like a duck, quacks like a duck.
I was gonna say she uses the men's room.
No. Well, they only had public men's rooms around.
They only had public men's rooms.
She just walks right in.
What else is she supposed to do?
Pardon me, boys.
Step aside.
Coming in. She had one of the original little like pee funnel things that they make for girls now. I love those so badly.
So good for camping.
Just lifting a leg.
Yeah.
I am not
the original man spreading.
Do some yoga.
She probably didn't scout for Custer, at least not at that point.
Yeah.
We'll get into it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Go on.
None of
us were there.
We'll get into it. We'll get into it. Yeah. We're just we're spinning a yarn. We're telling a story. We're over a campfire. It's tall tale time.
Oh yeah, we're in the woods. I forgot.
We just got to know that most of this is either from her own mouth or stories on stories. So we're just going to lean into
a long game of
fact
telephone.
Or fiction. Whoever knows, probably fiction, but the story becomes part of her story. So
there it is.
Yeah, it almost doesn't matter. Which is, I mean, kind of. Adam talks about that in his Wild Bill episode, where it almost doesn't matter, because if you tell the real story and then you go into the fake story, you're still telling both of the stories, but one is infinitely more entertaining than what actually probably happened. And so one is a lot more likely to get told over and over again than the more boring version that probably actually happened.
Right. Like the real story became, it has its own story, and then there's the legend, and that became what was so, I guess, culturally significant.
Yes. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. And we'll get into that. All right. So with the scouting campaign, Martha rode through states essentially herding natives into their own tiny little reservations. You got to properly wrangle them. Can't have any of these non-white people just on all of this land.
Loose
out there
doing their own thing.
Nobody's watching them.
No white people to keep an eye on them. How can we let that happen?
Oh yeah.
So the men that traveled with her doing these scouting campaigns and these wrangling campaigns, they loved sitting around a fire with her because, as I said before, Martha was a storyteller. Night after night, they'd sit around a fire, regaling each other with tales and drinking, smoking, laughing all through the night.
Yeah, I mean, you want a storyteller. That's what gets the morale up.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only that, though, but like for as many people as there would have been like, a woman doesn't belong here, there's equally as many that are like, nah, it's pretty hot. Keep telling your stories.
Or not even a sexual thing. She just might have been a really good storyteller. And it's like, you know what?
She's one of the bros.
Just let her tell.
Yeah.
Just let her tell.
I've been one of the bros my entire life. And it's like, I hit a level of comfort. If you can make fart jokes, like, that's fine.
Yeah, lady bros have existed since the beginning of time.
She's been a bro. She's been a lady bro. I love that.
I love it.
Any dude can be a bro, yo.
Yep. Any dude can be a bro, yo. I can't tell if I want that to be like a frozen yogurt little illustration.
Oh yeah, bro, yeah.
Or a yo-yo with like B's face on it with a little beard as the yo-yo part.
There's a comma in there, but yeah, either way, I mean, we can all kinds of merch,
We can
whatever you
figure
want.
that out.
Bro-yo is something that needs to be a thing.
So Martha was a fearless writer, and she was a hell of a shot, which is a huge deal because guns were still really notorious for being questionable with their accuracy at long distances.
Ouch.
Adam, do you want to talk about
apparently.
how absolutely horrendously inaccurate they were?
The handguns definitely were,
Yeah.
for the most part. By the 1870s, they had rifles that were like pretty exceptional, that were very good. Like this was around the time buffalo hunting was starting to become a big business, both for like, you know, the genocide portions that it helped with, but also just because you could make a ton of money in a summer slaughtering thousands of buffalo, and you do it with a rifle that you could hit a target at 8,000-9,000 yards, something like that. So rifles were pretty good, and most of the famous guns that people would have been carrying are still relatively short range as far as like we understand a rifle today. So like you have like a Henry rifle or an early Winchester, and those are probably most useful within 200 or 300 yards. And then the like army rifles today. Yeah and like army rifles by 1873 or by 1866 were rifles that were capable of hitting targets like 1,000 yards. It was a huge bullet. It moved really slow, but it was very, very, very accurate. So handguns and rifles and stuff, the kind that like scouts and dispatch riders and Pony Express riders would use, are probably going to be cap and ball revolvers, which means that you're loading each individual cylinder of the revolver with a little paper cartridge with a bullet, just a lead ball, a measure of powder, and then you have to put a percussion cap on the back of that chamber individually. So it takes like 45 minutes to reload the thing. You've got 6 shots, and it's like, you know, so
aim
like
as good as a stormtrooper,
right? And like so Hickok becomes famous because he's an exceptional marksman, and like literally everyone, despite all the exaggerations, like everyone who met him knew that this guy was an absolute deadeye, and he was just you know, a savant with firearms. He could hit anything at any range. When he killed Davis Tutt in the famous shootout in 1865, some people who were there measured it out. They said it was like, usually it's between a distance of like, you know, 25 meters or something like that to like 100
20 paces or whatever it is.
Yeah, but I think the longest one, somebody said like 75 paces, which is quite a distance for like a Navy revolver. That's a hard shot to make, and he shot Davis Tutt like straight through the heart. So wow. Yeah. So like it's like precision marksmanship is possible, but it's not common, because for the most part, like these weapons were like, they were well made and they were rifled, and you know, but it's, the skill takes a lot of practice, and
and
you know,
money to buy the munitions and everything.
Yep. And so like the fact that there are people, you know, kind of going out of their way to say that Calamity Jane was a really good shot is probably true, because we know that from lots of different eyewitnesses and not just herself.
Okay.
But so it wasn't impossible, but they're definitely not like the kind of precision like match shooting pistols that we have today. They're a little bit more rough and ready, and they're a little bit more kind of cantankerous, but if you take good care of them and you practice with them, like they're pretty good.
See, the only thing I know about all this is just what I learned from Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah.
So as soon as you started talking about I was going to ask, like,
historically accurate as far as like the weapons are considered.
Especially the Winchester repeater was the one that came to my mind, because that was the one I used constantly.
Yeah. So the Winchesters were they became pretty well used for like frontiersmen and whatnot, but one of the sort of popular kind of frontier myths is that like, oh, these Winchesters were like so precision designed and everything, and it's like they were good, but you had to like clean them all the time. And if any of you have ever fired black powder, that shit's dirty as hell.
It's horrible.
So dirty.
So
and
much.
so like the Winchesters and the Henrys, the lever actions, like you fire 10 shots of black powder and those things get so gummed up that you have to strip it down and clean it. And this is one of the reasons that the Army didn't take a Winchester, right? And there are so many kind of like modern gun people who are like, oh, you know, they should have used Winchesters. They're like assault rifles. It's like, well, they are for the first 10 or 12 shots. Yeah. And then you have to clean it. And
for the next 45 minutes, you're cleaning and reloading.
So like, if if you were to take a Winchester now and use like cowboy load modern smokeless powder, it can feel like an assault rifle. It can feel very functional. But like if you replace that with black powder and like go out for a day at the range, you're going to spend a lot more time cleaning than you are shooting. And like that's one of the reasons the Army was like, no, that thing's too finicky. It's going to break. We're not using them. And they use really
also part of the reason why more people didn't die in earlier wars is because you had one-shot rifles that you were stuffing, shooting, cleaning.
Yep.
All right.
Every single shot has to be very deliberate and planned out. You don't want to waste any of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that actually explains a lot of the tactics of the Civil War, the long lines, elbow to elbow, marching out. Like that was actually the most effective way to take land, or to take terrain, whatnot.
Right.
And it seems suicidal and foolish, but it wasn't. It was people in charge knew what they were doing. Yeah, it was effective. It just looks very silly because it's not the way we do it today. But we also don't have the technological limitations to. Yeah. So it's
all the context that comes into play.
Yep. But yeah, basically a cattleman, she'd have a cattleman revolver by 1873.
There it is.
Or probably a Navy at this point, the big one in Red Dead.
What a great game.
I know.
I was actually telling Lauren at the beginning of the call that I've started playing on role play servers for Red Dead Online.
Oh, I really need to do that.
It's super duper fun. I'm playing on one called Ranch RP.
Oh my god.
Yeah. It's pretty fun. It's super fun. I recommend it to you all.
I'm gonna check it out.
The customization options in that game just really blew me away.
Well, all the cleaning. You have to clean your weapons, just like he was saying.
Yeah, cleaning your weapons and decorating them, the whole thing.
Yeah.
But also just like the amount of detail that went into the whole thing. Just like it's
they did a lot of research.
I also not to go on a further tangent, but I'm really impressed.
We love tangents.
The horse control. Like for one of the characters I'm playing, I bought a mule, and like the mule can do the little sidestep thing, and you can like slide to it, and it's so good.
And like it's crazy too, because like for me being like a hunter, I follow a lot of like hunting pages, and mules are the best as far as like taking something to pack into the mountains and the woods. They're not skittish the same way horses are. They can pack more than donkeys, obviously. Mules are really they're, despite them being sterile, they're kind of a superior pack animal.
That's why they're bred. I mean, that's specifically why they're bred, is because they have bigger packing capability
and the tenacity of a donkey.
Exactly.
Yeah. they're more steady.
Mm-hmm.
They're more
even
they're less labile than a horse. Horses tend to be temperamental, and mules are steady. That's a big reason.
They've got a job to do.
Animals.
And they have strong ankles like a donkey. Or a lot
I didn't know anything about
horses.
A donkey's
are fragile
ankles.
as fuck.
They sure are. They're fast though.
Did you know that if a horse's intestines just like if it gets a little stressed out, its intestines can just like turn upside down and they can just die for no fucking reason other than
I didn't know stress brought that on.
Anything can bring it on.
Oh wow.
Literally
How have they lived this long?
Nobody fucking knows, because veterinarians got really good at treating them.
I
so
guess.
my brother,
and
my
here's the
brother-in-law,
other thing. North American horses don't exist anymore. What we have here are European horses. So that's a whole nother.
Well, they also like the reason they're still around is they're useful work animals, but also they breed quite fast. Like relatively, of course. Like you can breed, like you can start a horse ranch and you can start breeding generations of horses pretty quickly.
That makes sense.
And all it really takes is like one stallion, like one stud animal, and you can start a whole ranch because you use that one for all of the mares.
And you think of it like we do in like history and giving birth to humans, and if 2 out of 7 survive, that's a good day.
That is a good day.
That's a good brood.
They made it.
But like on like a cowboy, like riding a cattle drive, cowboys would probably they'd have like a string of like 10 horses, and you'd switch off all the time because as the rider you're putting on a lot more miles than the cattle. The cattle are just walking, but you've got to ride around them all the time, so you probably go through 2 or 3 horse changes a day.
So do those horses just go along with the cows and just kind of mosey on when they're not being used?
They
get
get
they
like
called it-
line.
They'd usually
they-
be tied together.
Yeah, they called it a remuda was the word. So I think it comes from Spanish, and that was the herd of horses, and
Okay.
it's where all your spares would be. So
Is it
once you
separate
ride,
from? Is it separate from the herd of cows?
yeah, they mostly follow along, but they don't really mix together because the horses could be gored by the steer
Oh,
because
yeah.
they can be persnickety and they have horns and they know how to use them, and that was a big danger for being on the trail. It's like if they panic, you have to try to like stop them from stampeding.
Yeah.
And you could do that by riding in front of them and like shooting your pistol to hopefully to scare it into another direction. And sometimes bulls would just like gore the horse and just ride over you because they're
Oh God.
panicky animals and they're very strong. So it was another thing that was like really, really dangerous about this kind of stuff is you're at the mercy of your work animals. And if your work animals die or panic or get sick or whatever, like it's tough, but you know, the survival of your wagon train or the remuda or the cattle is way more important than like an individual horse.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm processing all of this. That's fascinating. I can listen to you talk about horses.
I love like just the mechanics of all of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
so,
fascinating.
like,
You have separate herds, you have specific ways that you
Yeah.
had to treat them, and all of the things that we see from like Wild West, the shooting cowboys, they're riding
Yeah.
through, yip, 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 and they're shooting. We don't know, like, okay, that's just what cowboys do. Apparently, that's a form of control that I just didn't
Mhm.
know about. Okay. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And that's where all like the rodeo games come from, is stuff like this. We're working
Yeah.
at a ranch and separating out a cow to slaughter and chasing down horses. And I don't know, maybe one of you knows, but there's a game that they play at rodeos where like you have like a bull that's separated and you want to cut it out so that you can do whatever with it. And the bull wants to get back to the herd, and the horse like has to like sidestep to get in front of it to prevent it from rejoining the herd.
So being
And,
like a goalie.
And like the way these horses move is like I before I saw it, I didn't believe a horse could move like that. And they're like literally sidestepping and like planting their front feet and like squaring off with this bull that weighs 2 times as much as the horse. And it's incredible watching this stuff. And I like before maybe a year ago, I was like never interested in any of this at all. Like if I was interested in horses, it was like medieval horses. It was like old, English war horses and stuff. And like I started like researching for like my episodes about like John Brown and Wild Bill Hickok, and I was like, well, I guess I'm into cowboy stuff now.
Guess I got a new hobby.
I guess I've turned into a Civil War guy after all.
Well, it's so
Every historian
fascinating.
does. They go through their phases. There's the World War II phase.
Yeah.
There's the world history phase where each of you guys, like everyone kind of picks a continent that they're really interested in. They have the medieval times phase and then the cowboy phase. I feel like the more
there's always a
levels
cowboy
you
phase.
get to.
Yeah, I joke with my wife because when I was in grad school, like every time I would tell somebody I'm studying like the American military of the 19th century, and they're like, oh, so the Civil War. And I was like, no. War of 1812. I'm not interested in the Civil War at all. And it's like, oh, how things have changed.
Yeah.
So I'm reading my 3rd book about the Battle of Antietam and like
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
It's so fun to learn about things. I've decided to embrace it. Like, okay.
Oh yeah, go down your rabbit hole.
I have a nerd.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I love like this sort of, all of these things are about practical problem solving. And like when you understand the problems that they're trying to solve, and then you understand what they're doing in a much more interesting way. And I think like the sort of logistics and mechanics of like traveling on a Western trail or doing a cattle drive or something like that are just fascinating to me. And even as scouting for military parties, which we'll probably talk about in a moment.
Oh yeah. All right.
Where were we?
We got a fun moment coming, and I'm gonna lean hard. I have practiced this with Gary.
Ooh.
I can't wait.
Yeah. He's like, in 1872, Martha was ordered back to Fort Sanders to deal with the Muscle Shell Indian outbreak, which was occupying the time and efforts of General Georges Custer and Crook and General Nelson Miles. The campaign went well into 1873 when she faced the battle. From her own biography. It was during this campaign that I was christened Calamity Jane. It was on Goose Creek, Wyoming, where the town of Sheridan is now located. Captain Megan was in command of the post. We were ordered out to quell an uprising of the Injuns, and were out for several days, had numerous skirmishes, during which 6 of the soldiers were killed and several severely wounded. When on returning to the post, we were ambushed about 1.5 miles from our destination. When fired upon, Captain Megan was shot. I was riding in advance, and on hearing the firing, turned in my saddle and saw the captain reeling in his saddle as though about to fall. I turned my horse and galloped back with all haste to his side, and got there in time to catch him as he was falling. I lifted him onto my horse in front of me, and succeeded in getting him safely to the fort. Captain Megan, on recovering, laughingly said, "I name you Calamity Jane, the heroine of the plains." I have borne that name up to the present time.
So she's Calamity Jane.
We got Calamity Jane
She's entered the chat.
as of right now. Calamity Jane has entered the chat.
I love it.
All right.
So she did some pretty heroic things.
Oh, yeah.
In her eyes.
That's one story.
That is one story.
That is one story.
But boy, did she paint.
But boy, did she paint a story.
Yeah.
So that was one story. Another tale has it that Captain Jack Crawford, who served under General Crook, gave a quote 30 years later to the Montana Anaconda Standard.
Jane never saw service in any capacity under either General Crook or General Miles. She never saw lynching and never was in an Indian fight. She was simply a notorious character, dissolute and devilish, but possessed a generous streak which made her quite popular.
All right. So someone says she wasn't even there.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
She was, I guess you said, a scandalous character. What was it?
Notorious.
Notorious. Devilish. So I guess if
Dissolute.
she didn't see service, what did she do to get such a reputation?
She told campfire stories. She was entertaining.
That's right. That's what it is. She's an entertaining character.
Mm-hmm. She's like the town bard. Just sitting around campfire
the town
stories.
Bard.
Yeah, truly the town
Drinking
bard.
with
Yeah.
the boys, keeping their spirits up.
Okay.
So
okay.
I will say though that like I've seen a lot of like, historians or whatever be like, well, this guy says she wasn't even there, and just like take it completely at face value.
True.
And like soldiers are the most like catty, bitchy,
Motherfuckers.
gossipy motherfuckers on the planet.
Yeah.
And, like,
Really?
anything
Oh,
like
yeah. They don't want to be
what-
outdone.
Yeah. So studying
Right,
for
they're probably
my
just jealous.
master's thesis was about the American militia in the War of 1812. And to make a very long story short, there's always tension between the regular soldiers, like soldiers in the army, and the militia. And the story is usually regulars are better trained, they're more experienced, they're better led, they're more disciplined, they're just better overall. And the militia is like, well, no, those guys are like drunks and losers who couldn't find a good job. The militia are where it's like the heart of America, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's always this tension. And there's this extremely entertaining story following the Battle of Tippecanoe from 1811, where there was an officer in the an officer in the regulars who basically like blamed the militia for like bad performance. And a militiaman was the editor of the newspaper in Indiana, who then like wrote this absurd story about like this officer of the regulars like came in to like order him to withdraw his comments or whatever, and they got into a fight, and the newspaper editor says that he like disarmed the guy and beat him with his own cane.
Oh, shit.
But the thing is that like the focus of my thesis is about stories like this, and about how like if historians have always taken the side of the regular soldiers because they don't understand what the militia is. So like the fact that there's just some regular soldier 30 years later who's like, she wasn't even there, we have to consider that he might just be making it up because he thinks that Calamity Jane stole somebody's thunder or didn't deserve to have the recognition she had. And
right.
So like that's just another point of data. Like we of course don't know, but like soldiers
Goddamn, women are
themselves
taking everything from us.
Yeah, they're gossipy,
his-
catty bitches, and they sometimes are really, really like
vicious.
They don't want their thunder stolen.
Yeah.
Heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm just like imagining them all going, oh God, did you see her?
Did you hear what they said?
In her pants.
In her pants,
In
of
her
all
pants.
things.
Well, then she goes into a bar and they all want to buy her drinks, and they're not buying drinks for the soldiers, you know. So
Yeah.
there could be some jealousy and rivalry there too.
Absolutely.
Well,
Okay.
she may not have even been named Jane until after this title was actually given to her. Her name might have also come as a warning to men who would offend her. And so so to do so would quote unquote court calamity. She might even have worked as a laundry lady this whole time that she's serving as a scout. She might have been working as a sex worker this whole time. She also might have just been fucking a bunch of these guys. She got along with them in many ways. There are quite a few. Anyway, it's stories. Anyway,
Look,
It's stories.
She could have been, or she could not have been.
She's at the very least a hell of a spy.
I mean, in all honesty, though, who's recording what a woman's doing at this time? I mean,
well, that's what I'm saying.
know,
like she's getting all this information from somebody somewhere, one way or another.
And very likely, even if she was working in a non-military capacity, she's in the areas where fighting is occurring. She could definitely pick up from what's going on in the battlefield. So
yeah, even if she's talking to loose-lipped drunk soldiers.
Larry.
She knows at least what's going on. She's probably a pretty good listener of like, okay, so what is going on the front lines?
Observant, very.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that was it. Maybe it was like, kind of, she lived in those fantasies and she told stories about how she was there because she was able to take all of this information and spin a yarn so well.
I don't know. My vote says throw caution to the wind and believe all of her stories.
Exactly. That's kind of what we're doing today.
We're
telling both versions because it could have been a combination of all of this. I mean, she probably wasn't a scout 24/7 all day long, every single day. She probably had other shit to do.
Is probably the most likely.
Yeah, exactly. And again, her history is mostly stories, and it's stories from other stories. I'm looking at my notes here, and it has like, she's, laundry lady, sex worker. She might have been a dance hall girl. She did she was a cook at one point, in one of her past lives. So doubtless she probably maybe did that. It was probably like,
I just
whatever
like
you
hear
do
all these jobs and think of her wearing like different disguises. Like as a cook, she's got like a mustache.
She's got a different pair of pants for every job.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Different hats.
I called her like, Civil War Barbie. Like she has all these different jobs and nobody knows the true history. Which timeline's real? Nobody knows.
Killer.
She's Calamity Jane.
Exactly.
She's apparently 20 different women.
Well, her natural being is chaos.
Honestly, we just at this point, like, take whichever origin story you want, because there's just as much chance she actually did that as there is maybe that a guy just didn't like her and he lied on her all of these deeds to her, like a reporter, just to make himself feel better. I didn't get that much done in the war, so I can't, like, God forbid a woman.
She's not that great.
Me.
Right.
Yeah, she wasn't that great. Whatever.
Yeah.
Well, they're certainly not going to put her in charge of anything at this point in history. That's for sure.
And at that point, who's fact checking that guy? He can just be like, "Nah, she wasn't there." Whatever. Like,
there's no accountability, really.
Well, also, like, written history at this point is not that old.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's just as many stories of her being a scout as there are of her not being a scout.
Right.
Like, there's just as much evidence to show either one. Paperwork was not great back then.
For sure.
Yeah, very much an oral history for sure. Either way, Calamity Jane was born an expert markswoman, a cis woman dressing in men's clothes because they were comfortable, a fantastic horse rider, a fearless fighter, and the queen of the tall tale. So in 1874, Calamity, I'm going to just call her Calamity for most of the rest of this because that's her name.
Get it.
Got it. In 1874, Calamity was ordered to Fort Custer, where she stayed until the fall, and then her troop or whatever, the campaign, was sent to Fort Russell, where she served through the winter until the spring of 85, or until the spring of 75, when the campaign was ordered over to the Black Hills. They were going to the Black Hills to protect the miners and settlers from the Sioux tribes who had invaded the land of the white people that they just found there. Unprotected. No. This is our land because
nobody was watching.
Nobody was watching it at the time, and you didn't call dibs
from them.
Exactly.
Well, so if I could interject here, it's even more fucked up than that because like all the settlers in the Black Hills were squatters. They were there illegally.
Yeah.
This was actually treaty protected land that was meant
Ooh.
for the Sioux and the Cheyenne, because the Black Hills were like sacred and it was treaty protected land.
And these
So
towns are
all of
popping
the
up
people
fully illegally.
And it was after 1876, or it was after 1874, I think. Custer actually did a survey of what's now Yellowstone, and he found gold in the Black Hills. And so a whole bunch of white settlers went illegally to squat in camps and mine for gold in the Black Hills. So the army was actually there for unclear reasons. Like, they wanted to protect white lives, but they also may have been used to march into Deadwood and order everyone to fuck off. And it was the decision to like fight the Sioux was one that was actually reached. Like, it was a difficult decision, because there were people who were arguing, like congressmen who were arguing that, like, no, fuck those guys. Like, they broke the treaty and they're there breaking it, and like they're the reason the war started. So fuck them. And like federal, infantry and whatnot had been used, not often, but it had been used sometimes to clear squatters from treaty land. And part of that was humanitarian, and part of that was sort of like to protect native lives and to not cause trouble with native tribes. But a lot more of it was to protect land speculators, because you made a fuck ton of money if you were in level enough to like know when land was going for sale, and then you'd buy a shitload of it for like a couple of pennies an acre, and then you could resell all of it to a couple of dollars an acre and make absolutely astonishing amounts of money. So like, using federal troops for that was part of the decision-making process, but they eventually went to war anyway. So like, all of the people in what's now South Dakota were there illegally in 1875 and 76. And it wasn't until the annexation in late 1878 that they were technically legal U.S. citizens. And when we talk about Jack McCall, that's actually kind of an important part of the Jack McCall who killed Wild Bill Hickok story too.
We'll get to that. That's coming.
Yeah.
But with so with like the lawmen and stuff, you talked about Wild Bill kind of moving through the area as a lawman. Was he in these areas where people were squatting illegally? Or was he in a
around
different
this
area?
time? Around like 1874, 75, he was actually touring with a Wild West theater company.
Buffalo Bill.
So yeah, so it wasn't with Buffalo Bill yet. He actually tried to start. Yeah, he tried to start his own Wild West show in like 1870, like
Oh my
God. It was a disaster.
Oh,
it was
no.
a disaster.
These are the precursor to Barnum and Bailey.
Yeah, exactly. And so his wife
so bad,
eventually
he just went off.
Who, by the way, Lauren, you might actually want to look into Agnes Lake, because she's super duper duper interesting. But so they married like 2 months before Wild Bill died, but she was a circus performer and a circus owner after her first husband had been murdered. And then she was the first like woman owner of a circus in the country. And so Hickok probably met her when he was in Abilene, when he was the Marshal of Abilene. And he saw their show and then decided, I could do that. So once he left Abilene, he tried it and hated acting and hated, like, the first show is a complete disaster. There was like, there were bears and buffalo that like broke loose from the paddock, and it was a complete disaster.
I love
just
everything
cartoonishly bad. But then he got hired, I think it was with Buffalo Bill, to do a Wild West show kind of on that same pattern. So he's in like 1873, 74, back around like New York and Pennsylvania, touring with this Wild West show. So he's actually not even in the frontier at this time yet.
I had no idea he was a theater guy.
Yeah. Oh, well, he wasn't much of one.
Well, he did to it. Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned. Yeah, not much of one.
Right.
And like, let's just keep in mind, these are two completely separate people. We still have their paths have not crossed yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we're getting there.
They're finding their way to each other.
They're finding, yes.
They're destined. They have a destined love.
They do.
They're going to intertwine.
Like two stars just gravitating and drifting towards each other.
Fated to meet.
Mm-hmm.
In my notes it says it's one of those things that if she wasn't a scout officially, she must have at the very least moved through these campaigns. Even if she wasn't moving through the campaigns, we talked about maybe her kind of getting to, like, meeting them at the bar, out drinking them, hearing all of their tales, whatever. Another tale, which is also from her autobiography, is that General Crook ordered her campaign to Bighorn River in March of 1876 in order to deliver important information for whatever purposes. She doesn't really specify, but
Must not have been important.
Yes, but in order to deliver important information, Calamity Jane jumped in the Platte River and swam 90 miles in cold water at top speed so that she could get the message where they needed to go.
Uphill both ways.
In the snow.
Swam
In the snow.
90 miles. Swam 90 miles.
Does the autobiography say
cold
she
water.
swam 90 miles? Because I remember that as she swam across the Platte to get to the fort. And it was just that one little dip. Because the Platte's a pretty muddy, kind of shallow, kind of...
Maybe
and 90 miles of that, you're ripped.
I read it. I'm reading
Hardly
it.
a river.
Right.
I choose to read it as she is fucking aqua woman, and she's just like...
She swam laterally.
Swam
down the
laterally 90
She did
miles.
laps.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, this is all about the various...
It's about
tall
the fairy
tales.
tale.
So this is exactly how the fairy tale can get born, right?
So
one little detail.
here is the kind of the follow-up to that. So she gets the message to the guy, but then because she swam 90 miles in freezing cold water, according to her, she fell ill. So she had to spend a few weeks recovering from swimming 90 miles in the river. Not across the river. We're
in
just,
it.
Yeah.
That's
no,
it.
yeah, you're committed to that version.
I'm
yeah,
committed
sure.
to that.
She only got pneumonia.
I love the image of that in March. Yeah. You're swimming 90 miles down. And of course, there's probably like 3 different interpretations of that story. And she's probably run with all 3 of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, whichever
like,
the
maybe
more
she went across and then rode another
time.
horse. Maybe it was one of her famous river pony crossings.
Maybe the story started at 30 miles and then it just graduated.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
I like to imagine like just her like climbing out of the muddy Platte with just sopping wet buckskin, just like slimy, just gross buckskin.
like a frog with like a fish with legs coming to evolve on the shore.
It's the swamp monster.
Yeah. That's right.
There is obviously a musical of her, and we'll talk about that. But in that I grew up with this musical, so like that's how I know this character. But in this musical, she's like dressed in beautiful dress. She's got her hair done. This is the first time Calamity is looking like a babe, right? In a very long time. She's finally got a woman's touch. There's a whole song
after her pneumonia sabbatical,
right? And so she falls in the river and she comes out and she comes back to the cabin and she is completely sopping wet with mud. And I love that image because then you add the buckskin to it, and that just means it is a sopping, muddy, like probably weeds and roots everywhere. Yeah, it's heavy. She's like coming out of nowhere, and she just has this singular
looks like
piece
she's wearing
of
a
paper.
ghillie suit.
She's like, sir,
special delivery
online.
Everything else.
I swam 90 miles to give you this.
Yeah, but somehow
we say overnight.
Somehow the message is completely dry.
Perfect. It's been tucked away inside of her coat, like somehow
in her jacket.
Yeah.
She invented plastic. She put it in a bag.
It when she gets there. You know?
Well, she had to drink that whole bottle of whiskey to keep the message dry.
There you go. See.
That's what helped her got 90 miles down the river. She couldn't feel her body.
Oh no, she was out.
No kidding. Yeah, that was the warmth she needed.
You just let your heart rate slow, reel down, and like you become a human log. Just enjoy.
I was going to say she became like an alligator. She just kind of like drifted down.
Yeah, anybody can do that. Yeah,
swam at top speed. You just let the river take you, and you're fine.
You're just kind of snaking your way through the mud.
Actually, I don't know where she started that tale and where she ended it, so it might have been upriver.
I'm sure if we looked, we could find exactly where Crook was, because they kept pretty fastidious records about that kind of thing. And like March they probably would have been pretty near a fort. But
since you're the history nerd and you're now a Civil War history nerd, you should look that up. And I want you to get back to me on that. That sounds great.
I do have some fun things to say about the Battle of the Rosebud.
Yes, please do that, because right now Calamity is she's recovering. She's ill from her 90-mile river journey.
So this campaign she's referring to is happening in the summer of 1876, and this is the famous summer of 1876 because this is where the Battle of Little Bighorn happens, and there's this campaign. They're basically like 2 columns, they called them, of the army, both going in different kind of directions and coordinating with each other. And so up the Bighorn River and the Powder River kind of campaigns, they were supposed to meet up at Little Bighorn, at where they thought these Cheyenne, reservation hoppers, these outbreak kind of army was. They were supposed to meet up and coordinate, and Custer kind of jumped the gun, and what happened. But so the Battle of the Rosebud was this like hours long kind of skirmish that one of the columns had with a group of Sioux and Cheyenne. And one of my favorite statistics is, I talked about this all the time when I worked at Fort Mackinac, because the rifles that we carried were the standard issue rifles of the Army at the time, which are single shot breech loaders. And so everybody who's ever seen a Western, it's like, well, how come they didn't use Winchesters? And we've already talked about that, right? Because they get gunky and they get dirty, and you rather have something that you can literally bury in mud for a month and then take it out, load it, and fire it and be fine. And that was one of the tests that the Army Ordnance Department actually did. And so that's one of the reasons the Springfield rifle was selected, is because it's indestructible. But one of my favorite things to talk about was that, marksmanship was generally not very well trained at all, because it's expensive. You have to buy bullets, and you have to have time and a place for soldiers to practice. And so most of them just didn't until the early 1880s.
Here's a gun, but don't fucking waste your bullets. We don't have money to replace those. So just
you point and shoot. Here's how you theoretically do it.
Hold on to that knowledge.
Everything they know is theoretically.
So I'm a theoretical gunsman.
And so these are a lot of these soldiers have very little practice in marksmanship and everything, and they have a rifle that's capable of hitting targets at like 800 yards, but they don't have orders to shoot it that far, because you're just going to waste ammo. And so at the Battle of the Rosebud, the U.S. soldiers fired 50,000 rounds out of single shot rifles, 50,000 rounds over the 4 or 5 hours or whatever. And they claimed, this was the U.S. Army claiming, which means it's probably made up, that they killed 100 hostiles. So even if that's true, right? That's like Vietnam level, just dumping magazines into the brush and not hitting anything. These were single shot rifles, right? So you can really see why like the Army would be interested in like, no, don't just shoot anything. Like, aim, take your time, hit your target, because otherwise we're just spending money on nothing.
I just keep thinking of like stormtroopers.
And
again, with lasers, but Old West.
And again, like as a regular, as a person in the Army, rather than as a scout for the Army or as a militia or a frontiersman or whatever, like you don't have training, you don't have time to practice, you don't have extra ammunition to practice, you have what your officers tell you to do, and that's it. And so soldiers at the time were thought of as shitty people, basically. Like you literally can't find honest work elsewhere, so you join the Army. And so these are guys who, a lot of them don't speak English. There's a lot of Irish immigrants, there's a lot of German immigrants, and they're not, the level of kind of adulation that we have for soldiers today is a very, very, very modern thing. It's a very contemporary thing, and it's like not true of soldiers pretty much any time before the Second World War. And it's really the Second World War that kind of creates this sort of myth of the American soldier. And that's sort of where we are now, where we can sort of adore soldiers because they serve for our country. And that was not at all how they were thought of in the 1870s.
Also, you said 50,000 rounds?
50,000, yeah.
Okay, let's just put that in perspective. 100 hostiles makes that a 0.002% hit.
Yeah.
I mean,
it is easily in stormtrooper range.
Yeah. And it's like that. And again, if you compare those statistics to, because they did a bunch of number crunching in Vietnam because they were introducing fully automatic rifles for the first time, and soldiers were just hosing the bushes and not hitting anything. And so it's very similar. It's extremely similar in that kind of dynamic. And that a lot of this is what led to the Army adopting a marksmanship training program in the early 1880s. And before that, they had nothing. They had no rigorous marksmanship training at all.
They had 0.2% accuracy is what they had.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like imagine like making that, like, playing D&D or whatever. It's like, well, I've got a 0.002% chance of making this.
It's literally rolling a 1 every roll. Every roll.
The entire game for like 3 weeks.
Right.
Man.
That's wild.
So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for part 1. Obviously, there is a lot left to tell in Calamity's story. She hasn't even met Bill Hickok yet. And we all know that is really what we're here to hear today.
Oh, yeah.
Here to hear.
All right.
Yeah, that counts.
Well, thank you Thank you for learning with us for another episode of Well Behaved Women. And as always, we'd love to hear from you and hear what you think, who you want to hear next. Obviously, right now we're going to be listening to Bill Hickok next, but then after that. So you can find us on Facebook. So we have a Facebook page for Well Behaved Women. You can find us on Reddit at r/Well Behaved Women. You can also send us an email at Gmail at wellbehavedwomenpodcast@gmail.com. And we also have our Twitter, which is the one that's misspelled. So if you're looking it up on Twitter, it's going to be the letter B, Haved, Haved, women. And that's how you'll find us there.
Can we just say that it's intentional now because we have someone named B on the show?
Sure.
Obviously,
we'll make it a big capital B if we can try. I don't know if they let us.
Let's do it.
Okay.
You could
Perfect.
do that
Well,
in the display name.
Fantastic. I like that.
Big B's. It's Big B's page. No.
Anyway,
Okay.
this has been a fucking podcast.
This is our podcast. Thank you so much.
This is our podcast.
We're still working on it.
We're here all week.
All right. Thank you.